I should have started to work on this video several days ago. I finished Queen of Nothing, and then I was like, shoot, I'm gonna have to write up a video for this. It's late, I'll do it tomorrow. And then I didn't. And several days passed, and I suddenly remembered that I still needed to do this. I'm not gonna lie, as I said, I'm trying to think about what I would say, how I would explain the plot of the next few books in the series. I was a bit at a loss, meaning I had forgotten most of what had happened in book 2. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think that reader forgets about having read a book 2 months after having finished it is a really strong view. I could sit here and talk about character motivations or plot devices until I'm blue in the face, but let's be real here. Me telling you that I forgot 90% of the middle book after about 2 months is way more telling. The main thing that I want to tell you about this series is that all of the characters were so fucking stupid. To the point where I'm pretty sure that most of the problems wouldn't have existed in the first place if they weren't so goddamn dumb. It was mainly Jude, but I don't think that anybody escaped unscathed in this. At least none of the major characters anyway. In the second book, Jude is now the right hand to now King Cardan. She's the puppeteer behind the scenes, although this was implied that Cardan wanted it to be like that at the end of the first book. Idiot mistake number 1 is that Madoc is still not only walking around free, but also still in charge of the Royal Military Forces, which, baby girl, that's on you. I immediately clocked this as being a huge fucking problem from the moment I realized that he wasn't riding in jail with Belkin for what he did. He was the second person who betrayed Dan to the point who used his military forces to stop the guards loyal to Dan from rescuing him or the rest of the royal family. And he's simply walking around giving his opinions like they hold any sort of weight at all. As you can imagine, this became a huge plot point later on. Not so much in the second book, but in book 3. The main plot revolved around how he was still seeking power for himself through Oak. Although a new character introduced in book 2, a blacksmith by the name of Grimm Brothers? Grimm School? I don't know, it doesn't matter. He had made the blood-linked crown that they use, and he promised to make another. Going back to what I'd said a moment ago about how most of the problems could have been avoided if everybody wasn't so fucking stupid, if Jude had simply locked Madoc up in the tower for getting next to Balkan, then an awful lot of further death and destruction could have been avoided. I seriously don't have any sort of explanation as to why Madoc wasn't thrown into prison. The book never gave one. It's almost like the author herself never actually thought that people would question why it was that a man who had betrayed the king and helped to slaughter 90% of the royal family shouldn't be walking around freely, which makes me question her mental health, I'm not gonna lie. The second biggest instance of dipshit's gonna dipshit is that even after all the cheating and games Locke played on her, Taryn still decided that she was gonna marry him. Yes, even after he cheated on her with her own identical twin sister. Knowingly. I said this a lot during my review of book 2, but Taryn must not have any sort of high opinion of herself in order to willingly go through with this. At one point, Locke had asked Cardan to give him a role in his court, which Cardan agreed. However, Taryn wasn't happy about this and asked Jude to make sure that this didn't happen. She also begged for her sister to help her reign in her errant husband, which is like, she still married him, though. Literally, none of that was enough to stop her from marrying Locke. Right before the wedding, Jude was going back to Madoc's house in order to spend the night with her sister as a sort of hen night sort of thing. On her way there, she was attacked by a mysterious rider who took her wedding present for her sister. It was only when the wedding present, enchanted earrings, were in Taryn's ears that Jude knew that it was Locke who had done it. He attacked her because she was a problem, both to his relationship with Taryn as well as his relationship with Cardan and his future in the court. And that's fine and dandy, but Jude said and did nothing about this. She didn't tell Taryn that her fiancé had attacked her the night before Taryn's wedding to the man. While I am of the opinion that Taryn should have called the entire thing off right after finding out that Locke had cheated on her with Jude, this one is kind of on Jude for not telling Taryn about Locke having attacked her. Taryn was already not sure with her decision, and I think finding out about the attack would have pushed her over the edge. However, this particular subplot does have a bit of a happy ending, in that Taryn later went to Jude and told her that she'd murdered her husband, because to the surprise of only Taryn, Locke had not stopped doing literally anything. She got so fed up with this behavior that, whoops, I stabbed him 37 times. As much as I revel in the schadenfreude of Locke's ending, 100% of this could have been avoided if Taryn had literally an ounce of self-respect. Next, I'd like to talk about what was going on with Vivi's subplot with her human girlfriend, Heather. I sort of clocked it when she was first introduced in book 1. Very human relationships rarely end well, especially not when the relationship is built on a foundation of lies. Yes, Vivi did eventually tell Heather what she was right before she and Jude took her to Taryn's wedding in the fairy world. As you can imagine, the fairy guest played mean pranks on Heather, and then because that wasn't enough, Vivi used her powers to make Heather forget about the bad stuff that had happened, which obviously resulted in them having a huge blow-up fight, and they eventually broke up. But the problem is that Heather is also kind of an idiot. She still loved Vivi, and I get that it's hard to get over a breakup, but come on! She lied to you and then made you forget why you were so upset. Why are you still chasing after her? Eventually, Heather got dragged into the drama that unfolded at the end of the third book, if only because they needed somebody that they could trust to watch after Oak. And Heather did tell Jude that she had asked for Vivi to erase all of her memories of her and fairies and to woo her properly this time around. Jude likened it to a fairy tale ending, which I suppose makes sense. It's still frustrating that it even got to the point that Heather was stupid enough to come back for round 2. Before we get to the main feature, I'd like to pause for a second and talk about Cardan. I don't think that he's an idiot. In fact, he's probably one of the smartest characters, but my god, the bar is on the ground here. Over the course of the second book, we find out about his mother, Lady Asha. Eldred had thrown her into the Tower of Forgetting, which is where Balkan ended up because of his crimes. So you're probably thinking that Asha did something really awful, right? Her crime is that she gave birth to a son, Cardan, who had a bad prophecy attached to him from birth. That's the biggest part of it, I think. Asha was a social climber who was quick to abandon Cardan when she realized that she couldn't party while nursing a baby. However, in true narcissistic fashion, Asha was also quick to teach Cardan that he needed to demand everything that he wanted. And part of me, a tiny part, kind of acknowledges that as a prince, Cardan should want for nothing. But mostly, I feel like Asha would have done the same regardless of if Cardan's father had been Bob the potato farmer. I will discuss the prophecy about Cardan towards the end of the video because it was critical to the plot, but because of this awful prophecy, Eldred was quick to dismiss his youngest child. We already knew that Balkan was letting his brother live with him, but this is the why. However, Eldred's treatment of Cardan quickly becomes one of those social self-fulfilling prophecies. When you treat somebody like they're a monster, that they're only going to do bad things, you don't get to be surprised that the person decides that since you already think so little of them, there's nothing stopping them from actually doing bad things. I mainly felt sorry for Cardan because his parents hated him so much. His mother used him as a tool until she was disappeared. His father abused him. The only member of his family who was willing to take him in also continued that abuse. However, we didn't see interactions with any of his other siblings, so it's difficult to say what their relationship was like. But I imagine that none of them were great. Given his girlfriend, Knick-Knack didn't seem to like him all that much. Her drive for a relationship with him seemed more out of a combination of familiarity, as well as her own mother, the Queen of the Sea, pushing her daughter to marry the King of the Land. I think she did love Cardan in her own way, but he seems to be more of a stepping stone for her own power, rather than to be with him for the sake of being with him. However, this is leading me back to an earlier comment. Cardan is probably one of the smartest characters in the book. Even when he was forced into power, he was quick to hand over the reins to somebody who knew what the hell that they were doing. He kept his nose out of things. From what we saw of him in the home he shared with Balkan, we knew that he was a dude who knew how to play the long game. He knew all of the usual fairy tricks of doublespeak and subtle manipulations to get what he wanted. However, all of this intelligence was for naught, considering that his counterpart, the fucking main character, was so stupid her IQ was in the freaking negative. The issue with Madoc that I already talked about, how she didn't kill Balkan immediately, which allowed him to become a festering plot point in book 2. He made deals with the Sea Queen, yes, from his jail cell to try and get her into a position of more power. And then when Jude decided that she'd had enough of Balkan manipulating people, even from jail, she killed him at the worst possible time, after Balkan had become the ambassador to the sea. Killing him at the wrong time almost launched everybody into a huge war, and it got her exiled. Which was so freaking stupid, because at that point, Cardan convinced Jude that she would be better off ruling if she was in a position of actual power, so he convinced her to marry him. However, after she killed Balkan, the Sea Queen wanted Jude to face some sort of punishment. Cardan told her that she was exiled until such a time that a leader of the fairy royalty pardoned her. That part's important, okay? At the end of book 2, it was seen as this huge betrayal, but when she finally snuck back into Fairy in order to trade places with her sister to plead her innocence, Cardan was quick to call Jude out on why she'd stayed away. Remember how I said that Jude and Cardan had gotten married and that Jude became the queen? Could anybody please tell me what the definition of queen is, if not a leader? Yes, that's right. Even Cardan called her out in that one. She is somehow too stupid to function. Literally, the only reason why Cardan even wanted her was simply because the author demanded it. There was no chemistry between the two of them, no actual build-up. You might be wondering if Cardan changed his ways and became a better person because of his love for Jude. No. I have read an awful lot of romance novels where the two leads did not fit together, but the author forced them to fall in love anyway. This wasn't so much as trying to fit a Barbie puzzle piece into a G.I. Joe puzzle as it was trying to fit a toy train into a jigsaw puzzle. As I said, there was no chemistry, no build-up. Simply random confession, then they were married. Anyway, moving on to the ending of the series, as well as the promised discussion about the prophecy. As I mentioned, Madoc was still hell-bent on getting to the throne, even if he had to use the blacksmith to forge him another blood crown. Now, a bit of note about Grimbed for a second here. During an earlier conversation with Jude, he told her that every piece he made had a backdoor close into it. The magic earrings Jude had given Taryn made the wearer more beautiful, but if the gems were broken or pried out, the wearer would forever be cursed to be ugly. With that in mind, when Madoc showed up to demand the crown, Jude promptly broke it into pieces. However, this turned Cardan into a giant snake that ripped the throne room apart and ended up killing a bunch of people. Circling back to the prophecy, I have to quote the thing properly in order for people to really understand. Cardan would cause the destruction of the crown and the ruination of the throne. Since Cardan was the one currently in charge of the crown and he married Jude, he did technically cause the destruction of the crown. He also ripped the throne room and the throne itself apart during this transformation. And I simply cannot stand it whenever a prophecy is trotted out in stories. It's not the prophecy itself, but rather how stupid everybody acts about the entire thing. If Voldemort had done nothing, hadn't killed James and Lily Potter, Harry might have been the most apathetic teenage boy in existence. The same is true here. If no prophecy had been given at Cardan's birth, then maybe Elred might have treated him better, which would have resulted in Cardan standing with his family when Dan was set to be crowned king, which meant that Baelkin would have killed him along with everybody else, and Baelkin would have been crowned king anyway. No! Instead, we run off and slaughter James and Lily. Instead, we treated our youngest son like garbage, and then he becomes, well, not like Eldred was around to see it, but still, this is kind of on him. And that's pretty much it. If there were any other plot points, I've already forgotten about them, as I said at the start of the video. Yet another bland, boring fairy story. If it were spice, it would be flour. Do better, guys. Don't let mediocre, predictable, boring nonsense become popular simply because you haven't read other books. Come on.